Welcome back, everybody, to the Between the Word podcast. My name is Nathan Holliday, and today we're going to be reading Genesis chapter 19. So I'm looking forward to it. I hope you are too, and let's get started. Genesis chapter 19. And the two angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gate of the city. And seeing them, he rose up and went to meet them, and worshipped prostrate to the ground, and said, I beseech you, my lords, turn in to the house of your servant, and lodge there. Wash your feet, and in the morning you shall go on your way. And they said, No, but we will abide in the street. He pressed them very much to turn in unto him. And when they were come into his house, he made them a feast, and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they went to bed, the men of the city beset the house, both young and old, all the people together. And they called to Lot, and said to him, Where are the men that came in to thee at night? Bring them out hither, that we may know them. Lot went out to them, and shut the door after him, and said, Do not so. I beseech you, my brethren, do not commit this evil. I have 2 daughters, who as yet to have known man. I will bring them out to you, and abuse you them as it shall please you, so that you do no evil to these men, because they are come in under the shadow of my roof. But they said, Get thee back thither. And again, Thou camest in, said they, as a stranger. Was it to be a judge? Therefore we will afflict thee more than them. And they pressed very violently upon Lot, and they were even at the point of breaking open the doors. And behold, the men put out their hand, and drew in Lot unto them, and shut the door. And them that were without they struck with blindness from the least to the greatest, so that they could not find the door. And they said to Lot, Hast thou here any of thine son-in-laws, or sons, or daughters? All that are thine, bring them out of the city. For we will destroy this place, because their cry is grown loud before the Lord, who hath sent us to destroy them. So Lot went out and spoke to his sons-in-law that were to have his daughters, and said, Arise, get you out of this place, because the Lord will destroy the city. And he seemed to them to speak as it were in jest. And when it was morning, the angels pressed him, saying, Arise, take thy wife, and the 2 daughters which thou hast, lest thou also perish in the wickedness of the city. And as he lingered, they took his hand, and the hand of his wife, and of his 2 daughters, because the Lord spared him. And they brought him forth, and set him without the city. And there they spoke to him, saying, Save thy life, look not back, neither stay thou in all the country about, but save thyself in the mountain, lest thou be also consumed. And Lot said to them, I beseech thee, my lord, because thy servant hath found grace before me, and thou hast magnified thy mercy, which thou hast shown to me in saving my life. And I cannot escape to the mountain, lest some evil seize me, and I die. There is the city here at hand, to which I may flee. It is a little one, and I shall be saved in it. Is it not a little one, and my soul shall live? And he said to him, Behold, also in this I have heard thy prayers, not to destroy the city for which thou hast spoken. Make haste and be saved there, because I cannot do anything till thou go in thither. Therefore the name of the city was called Segor. The sun was risen upon the earth, and Lot entered into Segor. And the Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he destroyed these cities and all the country about, all the inhabitants of the cities, and all the things that spring from the earth. And his wife, looking behind her, was turned into a statue of salt. And Abraham got up early in the morning, and in the place where he had stood before the Lord, he looked toward Sodom and Gomorrah, and the whole land of that country, and he saw the ashes rise up from the earth as the smoke of a furnace. And when God destroyed the cities of that country, remembering Abraham, he delivered Lot out of the destruction of the cities wherein he had dwelt, And Lot went up out of Sagor and abode in the mountain, and his 2 daughters with him, for he was afraid to stay in Sagor. And he dwelt in a cave, he and his 2 daughters with him. And the elder said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is no man left on the earth to come in unto us after the manner of the whole earth. Come, let us make him drink with wine, and let us lie with him, that we may preserve seed of our father. And they made their father drink wine that night. And the elder went in and lay with her father, but he perceived not neither when his daughter lay down, nor when she rose up. And the next day the elder said to the younger, Behold, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine also tonight, and thou shalt lie with him, that we may save seed of our father. They made their father drink wine that night also. And the younger daughter went in and lay with him, and neither then did he perceive when she lay down, nor when she rose up. So the 2 daughters of Lot were with child by their father. And the elder bore a son, and she called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites unto this day. The younger also bore a son, and she called his name Ammon. That is, the son of my people. He is the father of the Ammonites unto this day. Okay, let's dive into the Genesis chapter 19 reflection. So, Genesis chapter 19, it starts with Lot being hospitable to the 2 angels. So he invites them in, he encourages them, no, please come in, like, don't stay out on the streets. And the angels agree, and they go inside. And then that night, there's a mob of people of Sodom that end up grouping outside of Lot's house, and they wanted the 2 angels to come out. They want them to come outside. And then in verse 7, Lot, he begs the people of Sodom to not commit this evil that they want to commit. So, what exactly is this evil that the people of Sodom are trying to commit against the angels? And I would say that there is, kind of a combination of a few different things that are going on here. But before we dive into it, I'd like to give a disclaimer that we're going to start talking about some pretty intense or mature subjects here. So, this is your time to either prepare yourself for that conversation or maybe to skip ahead to the next episode, and that's totally okay. So I just wanted to throw out that disclaimer before we, kind of dive into some of the sins of Sodom in this situation. So, give you a second, and we're going to hop into it. Okay. So the main evil that is being portrayed here is that the people want to sexually assault the 2 angels. And this is obviously a grave and evil sin. But, on top of this mob trying to, assault the angels in this way, there are also like undertones of other things kind of underneath of this perverted sexual activity. So, first off, it's important to remember that, these angels, they're guests of Lot. They are Lot's guest. So the people of Sodom, they're going directly against that principle of hospitality that we talked about previously. Hospitality was very important because guests are oftentimes they're entrusting their lives actually in the hands of their host, especially back then. They would walk for long periods of time, and maybe they're in a foreign city, and they're really just giving themselves to the host and in hopes that the host will be able to provide, food, water, shelter, safety. And there's really nothing that they can do about it once they're in the hands of the host. So that's why it was so important at that time to be a good host and to be hospitable towards your guests. And then as well as going against that principle of hospitality, they're also, they're demanding this from Lot. And by doing this, they're disrespecting Lot actually as a host. They're trying to, take Lot's guests and have their way with them. And that actually, reflects very poorly upon Lot as well. That makes him look weak and that he can't defend his own. So it's a bad hit on Lot's reputation too if this were to happen. So this principle of hospitality, it goes so far actually that Lot he offers his two daughters who are sexually pure at the time. So that's how extreme Lot is willing to kind of take his role as host of his two angels. But I would also like to point out that, it's very important to note that the Bible does not say that this offer from Lot is actually a good thing. So let's not get that twisted. In fact, actually, this offer may show how, since Lot was living in Sodom, he's kind of begun to compromise his own morals. So it doesn't say like, oh, this was good that Lot offered his two daughters at all. It doesn't say that. So in reality, he shouldn't have done that. But he did, and that could be an effect of having lived in Sodom. Like, yeah, his kind of heart was in the right direction, but he didn't go the right way about, getting out of that situation, if you will. So, kind of the last layer of sin that's at play here is that the mob specifically wants to assault the two angels. So they disregard Lot's offer of his two daughters. They're not interested. They don't want that. They want the two angels. So what's going on there? Well, this is kind of the evil temptation of attacking or slandering what is holy. And this is a very common thing in society. The most common version of this that I can probably think of today is, people who use the Lord's name in vain. I think that's a very common way that people like to slander what is holy. So those who say, GD or gosh darn it, or oh my blank, or even simply using Jesus's name in vain, these are all, kind of micro outbursts of that kind of sin that the people of Sodom are committing, that sin against what is holy or against the holy name. So, I would also like to point out that, those sorts of sins, they don't make a whole lot of sense to me. Especially like those sorts of statements that I mentioned earlier. They don't make sense to me. They're used for a very specific and malevolent purpose, whether the user is kind of conscious of that or not. So, the believer is obviously someone who would be conscious of, that and that the believer would know, not to use the Lord's name in vain. So if they were to commit it, they would be more culpable of committing it. But, I'd like to take a deeper dive kind of into the non-believer and why I don't think it makes a lot of sense why the non-believer maybe, does this so often. So, if someone is a non-believer, then why do they purposefully use these terms like GD or, Jesus's name in vain? And, I think there's definitely a whole list of possible substitutions for those sorts of statements that would serve a similar purpose, right? Like, you could say like, oh my goodness, right? Or gosh darn it, like I said earlier. So there's ways of not doing that. But, for the non-believer, there's just something so satisfying in the non-believer's heart when they invoke the Lord's name in this way. And if they don't believe me when I say this, then ask them to try to substitute it. Ask them to try to come up with a different phrase. And I would say that most of them would find that very difficult to do because it doesn't quite quench that itch, the itch of that whim that they're attempting to satisfy when they're speaking that way in that moment. So if someone were truly just a non-believer rather than being in the hands of the devil, they wouldn't have a problem changing their wording. Or maybe they would even prefer using a different phrase because it doesn't invoke religious terminology. If someone were just a non-believer and they didn't believe in anything religious, then I would imagine that they would prefer speaking outside of religious terms because, well, it's not anything they believe in. It's not a part of their worldview. Why would they purposefully use religious terminology then? But, instead what we see are these kind of unconscious jabs at our Lord. And when this happens, the devil takes great pleasure in that. This example of using the Lord's name in vain and comparing that to, a mob of people trying to sexually assault two angels, that may seem like a far reach. They're still sins of the same category, sins against what is holy. So I don't think we should take that lightly. And especially, it's one of the 10 Commandments. So, all sin is missing the mark, and we should aim to be free from sin. So I think it's a fair and modern way that people have this sort of mob mentality towards what is holy. And it's a much lower barrier to entry. It doesn't take a lot for someone to just spout out some words and to commit this sort of sin. That's a very easy and obviously, once again, a very common thing that we see, and it's very unfortunate. Verse 10, we see that the angels actually save Lot, and they blind the mob so that they cannot find the door. And this is kind of a reflection of, how we become blinded by sin. So all these people of the mob are, they're the horrible sinners of Sodom. So they become blind. They become blind and they can't navigate the way forward. They're blinded by their sin. And Lot is then told to gather his family and he's told to evacuate the city. But in verse 16, we see that Lot actually starts to linger a little. He's kind of hesitating to leave the city. And this is probably because he's dwelt there for so long amongst the wicked that he's kind of finding it hard to remove himself from sin. In fact, he actually isn't even the one to remove himself from Sodom. The angels actually take his hand and take the hand of his family members and they take them out of Sodom. So this is just a reminder that we are reliant on God's grace to save us from sin. So that's a clear example of that. Lot, he's not able to take himself up and out of the city. He relies on the angels, and the angels are obviously working for God. And then verse 17, the angels say to Lot, they say this very clearly, do not look back. Do not look back. And then in verse 24, God destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. So here we go. Verse 26, Lot's wife, she looks back. Come on, she looks back. It's hard. It's hard to read. And what happens? She ends up being turned into a statue of salt immediately. So, this action of looking back, it can be viewed as a sign of disobedience after being called forward. It's possible that this looking back was, in a way, reminiscing upon, what they had in Sodom. So Lot's wife is still kind of tied to that sin, and she doesn't want to let go of it. She doesn't want to let go of it. She's not ready. She's still attached to it, and it causes her to become immobile, lifeless, frozen, turned into a statue of salt. So the salt, the statue of salt kind of represents judgment. She was judged in that moment. She was given the grace to leave, and she was removed from the city, and she's told very clearly, do not look back, and she does. And that was her moment of judgment right there. So, this kind of salt, what does that represent? Well, salted land, it becomes barren. So, again, she's immobile. She can't move. She's a statue. She's lifeless. She's frozen. She has no life within her. And a reflection of this is actually, it's just like the bottom layers of hell in Dante's Inferno. They're frozen in the ice. They're frozen in their sin. There's no hope anymore. There's no hope. There's no life left. And that's exactly what happens to Lot's wife here. So, this is a symbol of what will come if we're unwilling to let go of these sins that hold us back. If we're unwilling to let go of these sins that hold us back, we will become immobile, lifeless, frozen, living, stuck in sin. So we're called to God's grace, and we're called to the path that God has set for us. And I think a really cool side note here is how this statue of salt in this situation kind of relates to the story of Medusa. So if you don't know who Medusa is, this is a mythological story. And Medusa, she has a bunch of snakes that move in all sorts of directions on her head. And those who look into Medusa's eyes turn into stone. So, how do these stories relate? Well, these snakes that move in all directions on Medusa's head, they might represent like chaos. Just, they're slithering in all directions. It's chaotic. They represent chaos. And chaos, of course, is a characteristic of the devil. While if we go back to Genesis, we remember that God is the one that hovers above the waters of chaos. He's the one that brings order to chaos, and he's kind of that. Yeah, there's that pool of chaos, and he pulls out of it and creates good out of it, and works through all of that, navigates it, hovers above it. So, those who look into Medusa's eyes, they're again turned into stone. So another way of looking at that would be, in other words, chaos, it causes death. And this is obvious even from a physics standpoint as well. So if we didn't have, the ordered and structured natural laws that we live in, then there wouldn't be life. There would be no life at all. Because it would be pure chaos, and life cannot survive in pure chaos, which is why chaos equals death. So, Lot's wife, looking back at Sodom, is very similar to her just kind of looking back into complete chaos, which is what they were living in before. They were dwelling upon that chaos, and she looks back at it, reminisces on that chaos, and bang, immediately she's turned into a statue of salt for it. And then moving on, Lot's daughters, they get Lot drunk, and they sleep with him to have children. So they do say that, there's no men left on the earth, so we have to continue the seed. And this is something that they might actually believe. Like, maybe they do believe that with those two cities being destroyed, there's no men left. I find that maybe far-fetched, but okay, I'll take them at their word. They don't think there's men left, and then they want to make sure that the human race doesn't die. So, this is their goal now, is to continue humanity, and Lot is the one who will be sacrificed for this goal. And this is opposite of what happens earlier, actually, where Lot has the goal of saving the angels and in order to do that, he sacrifices his daughter. So it gets flipped upside down here, all in the same chapter. It goes from Lot sacrificing his daughters for his goal, and then they are sacrificing their father Lot for their goal. So once again, this kind of shows the corruptness that is still within the family from dwelling in Sodom. So they aren't able to see clearly anymore, and they're engaging in morally evil things in order to try and produce a morally good end. So they don't see how this sacrifice is improper, or maybe how things could be done actually in a different way. They immediately jump to, okay, well, we know this isn't good, but this is just what's going to have to be done in order to get out of this bad situation. And they do know that this isn't the right thing to do. Because you might be asking yourself, well, maybe they just assumed that was the right thing to do. But they do know that this isn't the right thing to do. Because if they thought that it was okay, well then, why did they get their father drunk first to do it? So they do know that this is wrong, because they actually deceived their father by getting him drunk before, committing this action. So, what should the daughters have done instead? Well, they could have spoken honestly with their father about the situation and said how they think maybe there's no guys left on earth and this is what they think has to be done. Maybe Lot would have thought of something better, but even better than that option would be to speak with God. Obviously, they didn't think to themselves to speak with God first about the situation, and they could have just asked him for guidance, and they could have relied and trusted upon the Lord. But because they dwelt in Sodom for so long, they've kind of been removed from that, and clearly haven't been asking God for direction, because they probably would have been guided out of that city a long time ago. So that's probably what they should have done, is just ask for God and his guidance and trusted in the Lord. But they chose not to do that. And instead, they took it upon themselves to commit this action. So that's what I have for Genesis chapter 19. Well, I hope you enjoyed that reflection period for chapter 19. Yeah, I'll just say for me personally, I'm constantly asking God, please don't let me be like Lot's wife. Don't let me be turned into a statue of salt, or don't let me be like the Pharaoh whose heart is hardened to the point where there's no hope anymore. So those are things that I'm constantly asking for, and just asking for his grace and his strength and his mercy. I don't know, hopefully maybe that's helpful for you in your life, because I know that has been helpful for me in mine. So I hope that this reading was good and was of benefit, and that you learned something today. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for joining me for this reading. And yeah, until next time, I'm Nathan Holliday. This is the Between the Word podcast, and I will see you next episode. God bless.